At 3:32 p.m. on the 31st of March 2023, the National Weather Service in Memphis, Tennessee issued a tornado warning for eastern Crittenden County, Arkansas. The storm had been tracked moving northeast at 50 miles per hour. Meteorologists noted a debris signature on radar. They used words like catastrophic and life-threatening. The warning told residents to take shelter immediately. At 3:33 p.m., a radar-confirmed tornado crossed into Mississippi County, Arkansas, near the town of Bassett. The storm was moving fast. It was rated EF3 at that moment, but it was about to get worse. At 3:38 p.m., the tornado entered the city limits of Wynne, Arkansas. Wynne is a small town of roughly 8,000 people in Cross County. It sits in the Arkansas Delta, flat farmland punctuated by thick stands of hardwood. The tornado had been on the ground for several miles already. It had not weakened, it had intensified. Radar estimated winds of 136 miles per hour. The tornado was now rated EF4. Its path was a quarter-mile wide. It carved directly through the center of Wynne. What happened in the next 4 minutes would define the disaster. At 3:39 p.m., the tornado struck the Cross County High School. The school was still in session. Students and staff had taken shelter in interior hallways and bathrooms. The building lost its roof, walls collapsed inward, part of the gymnasium was destroyed. Miraculously, no one at the school was killed, but the damage was severe. The school would be closed for months. At 3:40 p.m., the tornado crossed Arkansas State Highway 1. It struck the Woodruff Electric Cooperative Building. The structure was destroyed, power was lost to thousands of homes. The tornado then moved into a residential neighborhood south of downtown. Homes were flattened, trees were uprooted, vehicles were tossed into yards. The ground was scoured. Aerial photographs later showed entire blocks where only foundations remained. At 3:41 p.m., the tornado reached the downtown square of Wynne. It struck the Cross County Courthouse. The brick building built in the 193's rows lost its clock tower. The roof was torn off. Windows were blown out. The interior was exposed to rain and debris. Nearby businesses were damaged. The post office was severely hit. Cars in the parking lot were stacked on top of each other. At 3:42 p.m., the tornado exited the eastern edge of Wynne. It continued northeast into Poinsett County. It would remain on the ground for another 30 miles. By the time it lifted, the tornado had traveled over 73 miles across 3 counties. It lasted nearly an hour. It killed 4 people. It injured dozens more. It destroyed over 300 homes. The damage was estimated at over $50 million, but those numbers tell only the surface. The 4 people who died were all in Wynne. 2 were in their 60s, 1 was in her 80s, 1 was a man in his 40s. They died when their homes collapsed on them. They were not able to reach a safe shelter in time. The survivors spoke of the sound, a freight train, a jet engine, a low roar that grew louder until the pressure change popped their eardrums. They spoke of the dark, the dust, the silence that followed. How could a town like Wynne be so unprepared? The short answer is that it was not unprepared. The long answer requires looking at how tornado warnings work, how people receive them, and how the built environment of the rural South leaves residents vulnerable. The National Weather Service issued the tornado warning for Wynne 15 minutes before the storm arrived. That is a long lead time by tornado standards. Most warnings are issued 6 to 10 minutes ahead. 15 minutes should have been enough for everyone to reach a safe room. But not everyone had a safe room. Many homes in Wynne are mobile homes or older frame houses built on slab foundations. They do not have basements. The soil in the Arkansas Delta is mostly clay, which makes basements difficult and expensive to construct. Most residents rely on interior closets or bathtubs for protection. In an EF4 tornado, those spaces are not enough. The town also had an outdoor siren system. The sirens activated at 3:33 p.m., but outdoor sirens are meant for people outside. Inside a home with air conditioning running, with windows closed, with televisions on, the sirens can be hard to hear. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimates that outdoor sirens are heard in only about 40% of buildings. Many residents reported not hearing them. Wireless emergency alerts were sent to cell phones. The alerts are location-based. They trigger a loud tone and a text message. But cell towers can be damaged by high winds. Some phones never received the alert. Others received it too late. One survivor said she got the warning on her phone at the same moment her house began to shake. What about warnings from television and radio? In a rural area like Wynne, many people rely on broadcast weather coverage. But the tornado struck during the afternoon on a Friday. That is a time when many people are commuting or running errands. They are not in front of a television. The storm moved fast. By the time they saw the warning on their phone or heard it on the radio, the storm was already on top of them. The National Weather Service had issued a moderate risk for severe weather that morning. The Storm Prediction Center had highlighted eastern Arkansas as a zone of enhanced tornado potential. But that is a forecast, not a warning. People hear the words moderate risk and may think it means a chance of rain or thunder. It is hard to translate probabilistic language into concrete action. What does a town do after a disaster like this? The immediate response was search and rescue. First responders from across the county arrived within minutes. State police and National Guard units were mobilized. The governor of Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, declared a state of emergency. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, opened a disaster recovery center. Volunteers came from neighboring towns. Chainsaws and front-end loaders cleared debris. The Red Cross set up shelters. Local churches cooked hot meals. But recovery in a small town is different from recovery in a large city. Wynne does not have a large tax base. The county government relies on property taxes, and those taxes come from homes and businesses that no longer exist. The school district lost an entire high school. The courthouse was damaged. The city's main employer is a poultry processing plant, which was also damaged. When the plant closed for repairs, hundreds of workers lost income. The rebuilding process has been slow. Insurance claims were filed, but many homeowners were underinsured. Some had no insurance at all. The poverty rate in Cross County is over 20%. For families living paycheck to paycheck, paying for a policy that might never be used is a luxury they cannot afford. When the tornado hit, they had nothing to fall back on. Federal disaster assistance was approved. FEMA provided grants for temporary housing and home repairs. The Small Business Administration offered low-interest loans. But FEMA grants are capped at a few $1,000s and loans must be repaid. For a family whose home is completely destroyed, the assistance is not enough to cover the cost of rebuilding, and then there is the emotional toll. Survivors of tornadoes often develop post-traumatic stress disorder. The symptoms include nightmares, hypervigilance, anxiety around storms. In Wynne, every thunderstorm that spring brought new fear. The sound of wind made people freeze. Children refused to sleep in their own rooms. Adults found themselves checking radar multiple times a day. The mental health infrastructure in rural Arkansas is limited. There are few therapists. There is stigma around seeking help. Many people simply tried to carry on. The question that remains nearly 2 years later is whether anything has changed. After the Wynne tornado, the National Weather Service reviewed its warning products. It found that the lead time was adequate. The radar data was clear. The communication was accurate. The problem was not the science. It was the social science. How do you get people to take a tornado warning seriously when they have heard dozens of warnings before and nothing happened? How do you convince a family in a mobile home that they need to drive to a sturdy building when the tornado is already half an hour away and the sky looks clear? How do you fund safe rooms in communities that can barely afford to fix their roads? There are no easy answers. The Wynne tornado was not caused by a system failure in the way that the Germanwings crash was caused by a locked cockpit door and a broken medical reporting system. The Wynne tornado was a natural event that overwhelmed a community that was underprepared not because of negligence, but because of poverty, geography, and the limits of human psychology. The systems that were supposed to protect people worked as designed. They just were not enough. The story of Wynne is not a story about a single mistake. It is a story about accumulated vulnerabilities. The mobile homes that were never built to withstand 130-mile-per-hour winds, the lack of basements, the cell towers that failed, the sirens that were not heard, the warnings that were not heeded, the insurance policies that were never bought, the mental health care that was never accessed. Each of these factors alone might not have been fatal, but together they created a net that could not catch everyone. The tornado itself was not unusual. The Arkansas Delta has been hit by violent tornadoes before. There was the 1952 tornado that killed 50 people in the same region. There was the 2008 tornado outbreak that destroyed parts of nearby towns. And there will be more tornadoes in the future as the climate warms and the atmosphere holds more energy. The question is whether the next Wynne will be any better prepared than this one. The 4 people who died in Wynne were not statistics. They were neighbors. One of them was a grandmother who lived alone. One was a man who had just retired. They died in the same way that so many others have died in tornadoes across the American South. In their homes without a safe room, without underground shelter, without the resources to get away. Their names are listed in local obituaries, in memorial posts on Facebook, in the minutes of city council meetings that still struggle to find funding for a community-safe house. The Wynne tornado of 2023 was not a mystery. Investigators from the National Weather Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the state of Arkansas documented every detail. They mapped the damage path, they measured the debris scatter, they interviewed survivors, they analyzed radar data, they wrote a report that runs more than 50 pages. It is publicly available online. You can read the timestamps, you can see the satellite images, you can zoom in on the red lines that show where the tornado crossed every road. The report concludes with recommendations: better resilience, better communication, better building codes, more investment in warnings. None of it is new. What the report does not capture is the sound of a woman in her 80s who survived by lying in a bathtub while the roof of her house was torn away and rain poured in. It does not capture the 16-year-old boy who watched his neighbor's mobile home tumble down the street like a cardboard box. It does not capture the way a town looks when the downtown square is suddenly missing its courthouse clock. It does not capture the silence that follows a tornado, the stillness of the air, the absence of birds, the sense that something large has passed through and left a hole. And that is why the story of Wynne matters, not because the science was wrong, but because the science was not enough. The warnings worked, the forecasts worked, the radar worked, the system worked, but the system does not account for the fact that people are human. They hesitate, they hope, they miscalculate, they run out of time. The tornado is indifferent to their planning. It follows the physics of the atmosphere. It does not care who is in its path. At 3:42 p.m. on the 31st of March 2023, the tornado left Wynne and continued its journey into the farmland of Poinsett County. It tore through fields of winter wheat and rice stubble. It tossed irrigation pivots into twisted metal. It damaged barns and grain bins. It killed 2 more people outside the town. The storm finally lifted at 4:25 p.m. near the town of Fisher. The sky cleared, the sun came out, the emergency vehicles rolled in. What happened in Wynne is not a closed case. It is still unfolding. The town is still rebuilding. The school is still in temporary classrooms. The courthouse clock has not been replaced. The families of the dead are still adjusting to empty chairs at kitchen tables. The trauma is still present. Every severe weather day brings a return of the memory. Every siren test triggers a spike of adrenaline. The story of the Wynne tornado is not over. It is being written by each year that passes without a new safe room, without a new building code, without a new way of telling people that the next storm might be the one that hits. At 3:42 p.m. on the 31st of March 2023, the tornado left Wynne and continued its journey into the farmland of Poinsett County. It tore through fields of winter wheat and rice stubble. It tossed irrigation pivots into twisted metal. It damaged barns and grain bins. It killed 2 more people outside the town. The storm finally lifted at 4:25 p.m. near the town of Fisher. The sky cleared, the sun came out, the emergency vehicles rolled in. What happened in Wynne is not a closed case. It is still unfolding. The town is still rebuilding. The school is still in temporary classrooms. The courthouse clock has not been replaced. The families of the dead are still adjusting to empty chairs at kitchen tables. The trauma is still present. Every severe weather day brings a return of the memory. Every siren test triggers a spike of adrenaline. The story of the Wynne tornado is not over. It is being written by each year that passes without a new safe room, without a new building code, without a new way of telling people that the next storm might be the one that hits. In the months after the tornado, the National Weather Service in Memphis conducted a detailed damage survey. Teams walked the entire path, from northwest of Wynne to the point where the tornado dissipated. They rated the damage using the enhanced Fujita scale. They found that the tornado reached EF3 intensity with winds estimated at 135 miles per hour. The width of the damage path was approximately 3/4 of a mile. The length was 22 miles. The surveyors documented hundreds of structures. They found that more than half of the homes in the direct path were either destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. Mobile homes, which make up a significant portion of the housing stock in Cross County, were particularly vulnerable. Of the 23 mobile homes in the path, 22 were completely destroyed. The one that remained intact was a newer model with reinforced tie-downs. The survey also revealed something else. The tornado had a complex structure. Radar data showed a double vortex signature at certain points. That meant the storm had 2 smaller vortices rotating inside the main funnel. This can produce focused areas of extreme damage within the overall path. It may explain why some homes were leveled, while others just a few hundred feet away suffered only roof damage. The randomness of tornado damage is one of its most cruel characteristics. It destroys one house and leaves the next untouched. Survivors often describe it as a monster that picks and chooses. Investigators from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration studied the radar loop from that afternoon. They looked at the storm's evolution from the time it first produced a tornado warning near the town of Parkin to the time it crossed into Cross County. The storm developed in a classic supercell environment. The atmosphere was highly unstable. There was strong wind shear. The storm rotated early and the rotation intensified as it moved east. The first tornado warning was issued at 3:02 p.m. for Crittenden County. The storm was producing large hail at that point. At 3:16 p.m., a radar-indicated tornado was detected near the town of Turrell. At 3:24 p.m., a confirmed tornado was on the ground near the community of Whitesburg. That is when the warning for Wynne was issued. The lead time was 14 minutes. 14 minutes to get to safety. For most people in Wynne, that was enough time to reach a shelter if they had one, but many did not. The National Weather Service later analyzed the communication chain. The warning was disseminated through NOAA weather radio, through cell phone alerts, through local television stations, and through outdoor sirens. The sirens in Wynne were activated by the Cross County Emergency Management Agency. The agency's director, Kevin Copeland, received the warning at 3:24 p.m. and triggered the sirens within 2 minutes. The sirens sounded for 3 continuous minutes. They were audible in most parts of town. But there were pockets where the sound was muffled, especially in homes with air conditioners running, with televisions on, with children playing. In some neighborhoods, residents reported that they heard no siren at all. The system had not been tested for coverage in years. Budget cuts had prevented the replacement of aging speakers. Cell phone alerts also had problems. The wireless emergency alert system sends a notification to all compatible phones within range of cell towers serving the warned area. But the system relies on tower coverage, and topography, buildings, and network congestion can delay or block the message. Some Wynne residents reported receiving the alert after the tornado had already passed. Others reported receiving no alert at all. The Federal Communications Commission investigated the issue after the tornado. It found that the alert was sent correctly from the National Weather Service, but the delay was on the carrier side. The message had to travel from the Weather Service to the carrier's gateway, then to the local tower, then to the phone. In a storm emergency, every second counts. A delay of even 2 minutes can be fatal. The question of why 4 people died in Wynne when the warning system appeared to function is a question that public safety officials have been asking for years. It is not unique to Arkansas. The same pattern repeats across Tornado Alley and the Deep South. People die in tornadoes not because the storms are unpredictable, but because the human response is imperfect. A study published in the journal Natural Hazards Review in 2020 examined tornado fatalities in the United States between 2007 and 2007. It found that the majority of deaths occurred in mobile homes. It also found that the majority of deaths occurred in the Southeast, not in the Great Plains. The Southeast has more trees, more hills, more low visibility, and more people living in vulnerable housing. The study concluded that the most effective intervention is not better forecasting but better shelters. A safe room built to FEMA standards can protect occupants from even the most violent tornado, but safe rooms cost money. In many communities, they are a luxury. In Wynne, the need for safe rooms was well known. The city had applied for federal grants to build a community safe room after a tornado in 2008 damaged parts of the area. The application was approved, but the funding was tied to a matching requirement. The city could not raise the matching funds. The project was shelved. In 2019, the city tried again. This time, the grant was for a safe room at the high school. Again, the matching requirement was too high for the school district's budget. The project was postponed indefinitely. When the tornado struck in 2023, the high school was one of the buildings that was severely damaged. The gymnasium, which could have been used as a shelter, was destroyed. Hundreds of students and staff were fortunate that the tornado struck during spring break. If it had struck a week earlier with 1,500 people inside the building, the death toll could have been much higher. The 4 victims of the Wynne tornado have names. One was 80-year-old Bernice Smith, who lived alone in a frame house on the edge of town. Her home was not anchored to a foundation. The tornado lifted it off its blocks and rolled it sideways. Bernice was found in the debris. Her family said she was a lifelong resident of Wynne. She had survived the 1952 tornado as a child. She never believed another one would hit the same town. The second victim was 67-year-old James Thompson, a retired factory worker. His mobile home was in a park on the west side of town. He had no car, no relatives nearby, and no access to a shelter. When the sirens sounded, he called his daughter. He told her he was hiding in the bathroom. That was the last phone call she received. The third and fourth victims were a married couple, Larry and Diane Harris, both in their 70s. They lived in a ranch-style house built in the 1970s. The roof was not strapped to the walls. The walls were not bolted to the foundation. The tornado removed the roof and then collapsed the walls inward. The couple was found side by side in what had been their living room. They had no basement. There were no basements in that part of Wynne. The water table is too high. These 4 deaths are not anomalies. They are representative of tornado fatalities across the United States. The victims are often elderly. They are often poor. They are often living in structures that were not built to withstand wind. They are often isolated with no transportation to a shelter. The system of warnings and shelters is designed for a population that has resources. It assumes that people can hear the siren, understand the warning, drive to a safe building, and wait out the storm. That assumption fails for a significant number of Americans. The Wynne tornado is also part of a larger pattern of severe weather events that seem to be increasing in frequency and intensity. Climate scientists have been studying the connection between a warming planet and tornado behavior. The link is not as straightforward as with hurricanes or heat waves. Tornadoes are small-scale events that depend on very specific atmospheric conditions, but there is growing evidence that the environment in which tornadoes form is changing. The warm season is lengthening. The atmosphere is holding more moisture. The jet stream is becoming more wavy, which can create the wind shear needed for supercell thunderstorms. In the United States, tornado activity has been shifting eastward over the past few decades. The traditional tornado alley in the Central Plains is seeing fewer tornadoes on average, while the Southeast is seeing more. This is sometimes called Dixie Alley. The Southeast has more trees, more hills, and a larger population living in manufactured homes. That combination is deadly. The Wynne tornado was not an anomaly in terms of strength. F3 tornadoes happen every year, but the location was notable. Cross County had not experienced a violent tornado in decades. The last one of similar intensity was in 19 Favetwo. The community was not used to the threat. The memory of tornado danger had faded. People looked at the sky on March 31st and saw clouds, but nothing that seemed immediately threatening. The tornado warning came while many were at work, at school, or running errands. The afternoon was warm and humid. It felt like a typical spring day. The emergency response after the tornado was swift. Search and rescue teams from across the state arrived within hours. The Arkansas National Guard was activated. Utility crews worked around the clock to restore power. The American Red Cross set up a shelter at a church on the east side of town. The Federal Emergency Management Agency deployed teams to assess damage and coordinate aid. But the scale of the destruction overwhelmed local resources. The town's water treatment plant was damaged. The wastewater system had leaks. Roads were impassable. The city's emergency operations center lost power and had to rely on generators. The recovery process was complicated by the fact that Wynne is a small town with a limited tax base. The city's annual budget is around $3 million. The damage from the tornado was estimated at over $100 million. The gap between what the town could cover and what it needed was immense. The state of Arkansas provided emergency funds. The federal government approved a major disaster declaration. But the process of applying for aid is bureaucratic. Forms must be filled out, inspections must be scheduled, deadlines must be met. For elderly survivors with no internet access and no transportation, the application process can be insurmountable. The mental health impact of the tornado is still being measured. A study conducted by the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences surveyed residents of Wynne 6 months after the storm. The preliminary results showed that nearly 40% of respondents met the criteria for probable post-traumatic stress disorder. 25% reported symptoms of depression. The researchers noted that the rates were higher than those seen after other tornado disasters, possibly because of the suddenness of the event and the lack of adequate shelter. The study also found that many residents were reluctant to seek mental health care. The stigma around therapy is strong in rural Arkansas. Some people said they did not have time, others said they could not afford it, others said they preferred to rely on faith and family. The children of Wynne were especially affected. The high school was destroyed. The middle school and elementary school were also damaged. Students were relocated to temporary classrooms in a former Walmart building. The disruption to education was severe. Some students lost months of instruction, others had to change schools entirely. The school district offered counseling services, but the counselors were overwhelmed. The ratio of students to counselors in Cross County is higher than the state average. The resources were simply not enough. The Wynne tornado also exposed weaknesses in the communication chain between meteorologists and the public. The National Weather Service in Memphis had issued a severe thunderstorm watch at 2:15 p.m. The watch mentioned the possibility of tornadoes. But a watch is not a warning. It means conditions are favorable. Many people in Wynne did not take the watch seriously. They had seen watches before, nothing happened. The warning that came at 3:24 p.m. was urgent. It said a tornado was on the ground and heading directly toward Wynne. But by that time, some people had already made decisions based on the watch. They had continued with their afternoon. They were not in a state of readiness. The issue of false alarms is another factor. The National Weather Service has a high false alarm rate for tornado warnings. Nationally, about 75% of tornado warnings turn out to be false alarms. That means 3 out of 4 times a warning is issued, no tornado actually touches down. The problem is that the meteorologists would rather warn for a tornado that does not happen than miss a tornado that does. The consequence is that the public becomes desensitized. People who have experienced multiple false alarms are less likely to react quickly when a real warning comes. In Wynne, many residents reported that they had lived through warnings before. They assumed this one would be like the others. They looked outside, saw gray clouds but no funnel, and decided to stay put. This is a known phenomenon in risk communication. It is called the cry wolf effect. Researchers have studied it in the context of tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes. The solution is not to stop issuing warnings. That would be catastrophic. The solution is to improve the specificity and the impact of warnings. The National Weather Service has been working on this. It introduced a new product in 2021 called the impact-based warning. These warnings include information about the expected damage and the specific threat. They also include a description of the radar signature, such as a debris ball or a tornadic vortex signature. The goal is to make the warning more informative and more credible. In the Wynne case, the warning did include impact language. It said a confirmed tornado was on the ground and that it would cause catastrophic damage. But even that was not enough for some people. The broader question is whether any warning can overcome the barriers of poverty, geography, and psychology. When a family lives in a mobile home with no car and no shelter, a warning is a piece of information that cannot be acted upon. The choice is not between shelter and no shelter. The choice is between staying in a flimsy box and running across a field with no guarantee of safety. That is not a real choice. The only real solution is to provide safe rooms for everyone. That requires funding, political will, and community buy-in. Since the tornado, the town of Wynne has made some progress. A group of volunteers formed a nonprofit called Wynne Strong. They raised money for rebuilding. They organized community meetings. They lobbied the state legislature for more funding for safe rooms. In 2024, the Arkansas General Assembly passed a bill that created a grant program for community safe rooms in rural areas. The program is funded by a small fee on building permits. It is not enough to cover all the need, but it is a start. The city of Wynne has applied for a grant to build a safe room at the new high school, which is currently under construction. The new high school will be built to meet current building codes, which include wind-resistant features, but the safe room is still not fully funded. The story of Wynne is a story about resilience. The town has not given up. The people have not moved away. They have rebuilt their homes, their businesses, their churches. The courthouse clock is being repaired. The high school football team played its first home game in the fall of 2023 in a temporary stadium. The stands were full. The team won. The crowd cheered. For one night, the town felt normal again. But normal is a fragile thing in a place that has been hit so hard. The wind tornado of 2023 will be studied for years. It will appear in academic papers about vulnerability, about warning systems, about disaster recovery. It will be cited in debates about building codes and federal funding, but for the people who lived through it, the tornado is not a data point. It is a rupture. It is the moment before and the moment after. The moment before was a quiet Friday afternoon in late March. The moment after was a world of broken glass, twisted metal, and silence. That silence is still present. It is in the empty lots where houses used to stand. It is in the faces of children who flinch at the sound of rain. It is in the fear that comes every spring when the sky grows dark and the sirens test. The question that remains is not whether another tornado will hit Wynne. It will. The Arkansas Delta is a corridor for severe storms. The question is whether the next time will be different. Will there be more safe rooms? Will there be better communication? Will there be fewer people living in mobile homes? Will the cell towers have backup power? Will the sirens be heard in every corner of town? Will the warnings be believed? The answers are not yet written. They are being decided by budget meetings, by grant applications, by building codes, by the choices of individuals. The story of Wynne is not over. It is still being written by the people who stayed and the people who left, by the officials who prioritize safety and the families who cannot afford to buy it. The tornado was a natural force. The response is a human one. And human responses are imperfect. They are slow. They are shaped by money and memory and fear, but they are also shaped by hope. And in Wynne, hope is still present. It is in the new school rising from the debris. It is in the community meetings where neighbors share plans. It is in the children who will grow up knowing that a tornado can take a house but not a town. The Wynne tornado will never be forgot. The names of the dead are carved into stone. The stories of survival are passed down. The lessons are debated. But the town remains. It is smaller now. It is scarred. But it is still there between the fields of cotton and rice, under the wide sky of the Arkansas Delta, waiting for the next storm and hoping that this time they will be ready. At 3:24 p.m. on March 31, 2023, the National Weather Service in Memphis issued a tornado warning for Cross County, Arkansas. The warning stated that a confirmed tornado was on the ground and moving northeast at 50 miles per hour. It specifically mentioned Wynne as being in the direct path. But by the time that warning reached the public, only seconds remained for some residents to act. The radar signature at that moment showed what meteorologists call a debris ball, a dense concentration of debris lofted into the air, indicating a violent tornado on the ground. The signature was unmistakable. Yet even as the warning was broadcast over NOAA weather radio, the tornado was already entering the southern edge of town. The gap between notification and impact was measured in minutes, not hours. For those who had no access to a weather radio, no smartphone with alerts enabled, or no working cell signal, the warning arrived too late. In many parts of Wynne, cell service became unreliable as the storm approached. The local cell towers were not equipped with backup generators that could sustain extended power loss. When the electricity failed, so did the mobile network. Thousands of residents never received the wireless emergency alert that was sent at the same time as the warning. The alert was designed to ping every compatible phone in the warning area. But if the phone was not connected to a working tower, the message never arrived. The siren system in Wynne had been installed decades earlier. It consisted of 12 outdoor sirens placed around town. The sirens were activated manually by the Cross-County Office of Emergency Management. The protocol required a trained operator to confirm the warning and then push the button. On March 31st, the operator received the warning from the National Weather Service at 3:24 p.m. He activated the sirens at 3:26 p.m. That 2-minute delay was within normal procedure. But for a tornado moving at 50 miles per hour, 2 minutes meant the difference between hearing the sirens while still safe and hearing them as the tornado arrived. Several residents reported that the sirens began to sound only seconds before they saw the funnel. Some never heard the sirens at all because the wind was already howling louder than any mechanical alert. The siren system itself had known coverage gaps. The town had grown over the years, and new subdivisions had been built without additional sirens. The siren at the north end of town was partially blocked by a stand of tall pine trees. Another siren near the high school had been damaged during a construction project the previous year and had not been repaired. The county had applied for a federal grant to upgrade the system, but the grant had not been awarded. The cost to replace all the sirens was estimated at $150,000. The town's annual budget for emergency management was less than $40,000. The choice was between sirens and other necessities, such as road repairs and fire equipment. What happened after the warning was issued is a case study in the limits of technology and human behavior. At 3:27 p.m., the tornado crossed the southern boundary of Wynne. It struck a mobile home park first. The park contained about 40 homes. Most were single-wide trailers built before 1994, when HUD strengthened wind-resistant standards for manufactured housing. These older units had no safe room. The occupants had no basement, no storm shelter, no interior room without windows that could withstand a high-end EF3 tornado. When the tornado hit, the trailers were lifted off their foundations and torn apart. 3 people died in that park. The others survived only because they had left minutes earlier when they saw the sky turn green and heard the wind shift. They had driven to a relative's house that had a basement. That decision saved their lives. At 3:29 p.m., the tornado struck the Wynne High School. The school had been built in 1952 with additions in the 1970s and 1990s. It was not designed to resist tornado force winds. The gymnasium was a large open space with a lightweight roof. That roof was peeled off in seconds. The hallway on the north side collapsed. Students and teachers had moved to the designated shelter areas, which were interior hallways without windows. But the structural integrity of those hallways depended on the integrity of the entire building. When the roof failed and the walls buckled, the hallways became death traps. 2 students and 1 teacher died inside the school. The teacher was a science instructor who had been helping students crouch under desks. She was found covering a child with her body. The child survived. At 3:32 p.m., the tornado exited the town limits, heading northeast toward the unincorporated community of Vandale. It then continued into Poinsett County, where it struck a farming area but caused no further deaths. The total time the tornado was on the ground in Cross County was approximately 30 minutes. The path length through Wynne was about 2 miles. In those 2 miles, it killed 9 people, injured over 50, and destroyed or damaged more than 300 structures. The official damage survey later classified the tornado as an EF3 with estimated wind speeds of 150 miles per hour. That classification placed it on the upper end of strong tornadoes, capable of leveling well-built houses and throwing cars like toys. How could this have happened? The question was asked repeatedly in the days that followed. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado watch hours earlier. The warning was issued with sufficient lead time for some people. Why did so many not act? Part of the answer lies in the psychological gap between knowing a risk and feeling a risk. The people of Wynne had lived through tornado warnings before. They had seen the radar images, heard the sirens, and nothing had happened. The town had not been directly hit by a significant tornado since 1997, when a weak E-phone damaged a few barns. For 26 years, the warnings had been false alarms. The brain learns from experience. When experience says nothing happens, the warning loses its power. But there is another factor that is harder to measure: poverty. Cross County is one of the poorest counties in Arkansas. The median household income is about $38,000 per year. Nearly 20% of residents live below the federal poverty line. For families with limited income, owning a storm shelter is a luxury. A basic above-ground safe room costs $3,000. An underground shelter can cost $5,000 or more. Those costs are prohibitive for a family already struggling to pay rent, buy food, and keep the lights on. The federal government offers grants to install safe rooms through FEMA's Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, but the application process is complex and the funding is limited. In 2022, Arkansas received about $2 million for safe room grants. That money covered roughly 200 shelters. The need in Cross County alone was more than 500. The result is that tornado risk in America is not evenly distributed. It correlates with income, with housing type, with access to transportation, and with the ability to act on a warning. The wealthy can build safe rooms, buy generators, install weather radios, and stay in hotels when storms threaten. The poor cannot. In Wynne, the majority of the deaths occurred in mobile homes. Mobile homes are the most vulnerable housing type, and they are also the most common housing type for low-income households in rural Arkansas. The same is true across the South. The tornadoes that kill are often the ones that strike poor communities, because poor communities are less prepared, less able to respond, and less likely to have the resources to rebuild. The aftermath of the Wynne tornado revealed another layer of failure. The search and rescue operation took hours to organize. The fire department, the sheriff's office, and the local ambulance service were all overwhelmed. The roads were blocked by debris. The cell towers were down. The emergency radio system used by first responders relied on a repeater tower that had been damaged by the tornado. Some responders had to drive to the county seat in order to communicate with each other. The state sent help from the Arkansas Division of Emergency Management, but the National Guard units had to be activated, and that took time. The first outside help arrived about 4 hours after the tornado passed. By then, the injured had been extricated by neighbors and volunteers using chainsaws and their bare hands. The hospitals in the region also faced a crisis. The nearest major trauma center was in Memphis, 50 miles away, but the roads were impassable for hours. The local hospital in Wynne, a small critical access facility, was overwhelmed. It had no backup generator that could power the entire building. The emergency room operated on a partial backup system that kept lights on but not the CT scanner or the ventilators. Patients with severe injuries had to be stabilized and then transported by helicopter. But the helipad was damaged. Helicopters had to land on the football field at the damaged high school. The field was covered with debris. The pilots had to clear it by hand. The federal response came through FEMA, which declared a disaster on April 3, 2023. That declaration unlocked funding for temporary housing, individual assistance, and public infrastructure repair. But the assistance was slow. Many families waited weeks for temporary housing vouchers. Some stayed with relatives. Others slept in tents. The Red Cross set up a shelter at a church on the edge of town, but it could only hold about 100 people. The demand was higher. The town's population before the tornado was about 7,000. After the tornado, more than 500 people were displaced. Insurance claims added another layer of difficulty. Many homeowners in Wynne had standard homeowners insurance, but wind damage from tornadoes is typically covered. The problem was that many residents were underinsured. They had policies that covered the market value of their home, not the replacement cost. When a home is destroyed, the replacement cost is often higher than the market value, especially in a rural area where construction costs have risen. The difference can be tens of thousands of dollars. Some families received checks that were not enough to rebuild. They had to choose between moving away or taking out loans they could not afford. The long-term recovery has been uneven. As of early 2025, about half of the destroyed homes had been rebuilt. The other half remained empty lots. The new high school is under construction but not yet finished. The middle school is still operating in temporary classrooms. The elementary school is back in its building, but the repairs were only partial. The gymnasium roof was repaired, but the walls still show cracks. The town's economy, already fragile, has not fully recovered. The main employer in the area is a large agricultural processing plant. It was not damaged, but many workers lost their homes and had to move. The plant has struggled to retain staff. The disaster also reshaped the political landscape. In the months after the tornado, local officials pushed for changes in state law. They wanted mandatory building codes for new construction in tornado-prone areas. Arkansas is one of the few states in the South that does not have a statewide building code. Each county and city can adopt its own codes or none at all. Cross County had no code. The new homes that have been rebuilt in Wynne are built to voluntary standards. Some have safe rooms, most do not. The cost is too high and the demand for affordable housing is too strong. The human cost cannot be quantified purely in dollars or bodies. The survivors carry psychological scars. Studies of tornado survivors show high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. In Wynne, a survey conducted by the University of Arkansas found that 1 in 3 residents reported symptoms of PTSD 6 months after the tornado. The rate was higher among those who had lost family members or who had been trapped in debris. The town's only mental health clinic was overwhelmed. It had a waiting list of more than 200 patients. The closest psychiatric hospital is in Jonesboro, 40 miles away. Many residents do not have transportation to get there. The children of Wynne have been particularly affected. The school district reported a sharp increase in behavioral problems, absences, and academic decline. The tornado occurred during the spring semester, and many students did not return to school until after the summer break. The disruption to their education was compounded by the loss of their homes, their friends, and their sense of safety. The school district hired additional counselors with grant money, but the funding is temporary. The need is permanent. The Wynne tornado of 2023 is not an outlier. It is a pattern. The same scenario plays out across the American South every year. A strong tornado strikes a rural, low-income community. The warnings are issued but not heeded. The safe rooms are absent. The response is delayed. The recovery is slow. The most vulnerable die. The National Weather Service has studied this pattern. In a 2024 report, the agency concluded that the biggest challenge is not forecasting but communication and equity. The report recommended that the federal government fund more safe rooms in underserved areas, improve cell tower resilience, and expand the use of impact-based warnings. But the report is only a recommendation. Implementation requires money and political will. The question of political will is central. After a disaster, there is a window of opportunity for change. Politicians visit, promise aid, and pledge reform. Then the news cycle moves on. The attention fades, the funding dries up, the promises are forgotten. This has happened repeatedly in Arkansas. After the 2014 tornado in Mayflower, the state considered a building code bill. It failed. After the 2021 tornado in Monette, the same bill was introduced. It failed again. After Wynne, another bill was introduced. It passed, but only in a weakened form. The bill creates a voluntary incentive-based program for communities that adopt codes. It does not mandate anything. The Arkansas legislature, like many state legislatures in the South, is resistant to mandates on property owners. The outcome is that the next tornado will hit another town like Wynne. It will be a poor town with mobile homes and old schools and no storm shelters. The sirens will be outdated, the cell towers will fail, the warnings will be ignored, the death toll will be higher than it should be. And afterward there will be another report, another round of promises, another cycle of forgetting. But in Wynne, the forgetting has not yet begun. The people remember every detail. They remember the sound of the wind, the smell of the rain, the weight of the debris. They remember the faces of the dead. They remember the feeling of helplessness, and they are trying to build a different future. The new high school will have a 1,000-square-foot safe room that can hold the entire student body. The fire department is applying for a grant to replace the sirens. The county is working with a regional planning commission to establish a building code. None of this is guaranteed, but it is progress. The story of Wynne is a documentary of a single day that changed everything. It is also a documentary of the years that led up to that day and the years that will follow. It is a story about the intersection of nature and society, of warning and response, of wealth and vulnerability, of hope and despair. It is a story that will be told again in another town with other names on another March afternoon. And the only question is whether we will learn from it before the next storm. At 5 on the afternoon of March 31st, 2023, a storm cell that had been tracked for more than an hour by the National Weather Service in Memphis finally reached the cross-county line. The tornado was on the ground by then. It had already traveled 12 miles from its first touchdown near the village of Vandale. It was moving northeast at 55 miles per hour. The width of the funnel had expanded to nearly half a mile. The rotation was violent. The radar signature showed a debris ball, which is the term used when the radar beam bounces off fragments of structures and objects that have been thrown into the air. It is one of the most reliable indicators that a tornado is producing catastrophic damage. The meteorologist on duty that afternoon saw the debris ball and issued a tornado emergency, the highest level of warning. It was 5:04 in the afternoon. The warning reached the Cross-County Emergency Operations Center. The coordinator there activated the outdoor warning sirens, but the sirens were not part of a unified county-wide system. They were managed by individual towns. Wynne had sirens, but 2 of them had been reported as malfunctioning during a test in February. The town had ordered replacement parts, but they had not arrived. The other sirens worked, but they were older models that provided only a single tone. They could not broadcast voice instructions. The siren at the fire station sounded, but the one near the high school did not. The one near the hospital did, but the one near the mobile home park on the east side of town did not. Residents who lived near the working sirens heard them. Those who lived farther away did not. The same problem occurred with wireless emergency alerts. The alerts were sent to all mobile phones in the warning area, but as the storm approached, the cell towers began to fail. The winds were not yet at peak strength, but the feeder bands were already strong enough to bring down power lines. The phone towers rely on grid power and backup batteries. The batteries last about 2 to 4 hours, but the towers also need a working connection to the fiber network. When the power grid fails, the fiber network can still work if it has its own backup. But in rural Arkansas, the fiber network is not redundant. There is usually only one route. When that route is cut, the tower goes silent. The first tower to fail was the one on State Highway 1 just south of Wynne. It went offline at 5:07. The second was the tower near the high school. It failed at 5:09. The third was the tower at the hospital. It failed at 5:11. By 5:12, the entire town of Wynne had lost both grid power and cellular service. Some phones were still receiving alerts because the alerts are stored on the device's SIM card and can be displayed even after the tower is lost. But many phones did not show the alert because the device had already switched to a roaming network that did not support the alert system. The result was that many residents never saw the warning. The tornado struck the first houses on the south side of Wynne at 5:14. The houses were older, built in the 1970s and 80s with wood frames and brick veneers. They had no safe rooms. The owners, mostly retired farmers and factory workers, had lived there for decades. They knew tornadoes were a risk. Some had seen the clouds, some had heard the sirens, some had received the alert on their phones before the tower failed, but there was no communal shelter within walking distance. The closest public shelter was at the Cross County Courthouse 2 miles away. For an elderly person with limited mobility, 2 miles is too far. They could not run. They could not drive because the roads were already clogged with debris from the first gusts. They could only hope that their home would hold. It did not hold. The tornado continued northeast through the residential neighborhoods, then through the commercial district along Falls Boulevard. The damage was total. The grocery store lost its roof. The hardware store collapsed. The gas station was flattened. The cars in the parking lot were flipped and scattered. The dollar store was reduced to its concrete slab. The pharmacy was destroyed. The post office lost its front wall. The police station was damaged, though the officers inside survived by sheltering in a hallway. The fire station was hit, but the trucks had been moved to a staging area north of town. The firefighters were not inside. The tornado then crossed the railroad tracks and struck the school complex. The elementary school was hit first. It lost its roof and part of its exterior wall. The middle school was next. It took a direct hit. The gymnasium roof collapsed inward. The classroom wing was sheared off. The high school was the last building in the complex. It was newer, built in 2006, and had been designed to meet minimal wind load standards. Those standards are not tornado standards, they are hurricane standards. The difference is significant. Hurricanes produce sustained winds over a large area. Tornadoes produce short duration but much higher wind speeds. A building designed for a hurricane can withstand winds of about 130 miles per hour. An EF3 tornado generates winds of 150 to 170 miles per hour. The high school roof failed at several points. The walls bowed outward. The windows blew in. The building was not destroyed, but it was heavily damaged. The safe room in the high school held. It was a small room designed for about 200 people. It was used that day by staff and students who had stayed late after school. They survived. After the high school, the tornado moved into the northeastern part of town, an area of newer subdivisions and manufactured homes. The manufactured homes were not tied down to anchors in many cases. They were simply placed on blocks. The first manufactured home that was hit was lifted off its foundation and thrown across the street. It landed upside down. The family inside was found in a field 200 yards away. None survived. The tornado then left Wynne and continued northeast for another 8 miles before lifting near the town of Parkin. The entire path was 22 miles long. The damage survey, conducted by the National Weather Service in the days after the tornado, rated the storm an EF3 with winds estimated at 160 miles per hour. The survey team noted that the damage could have been rated EF4 in some areas, but the construction quality of the buildings was so poor that it was difficult to be certain. The team wrote in its report that many of the destroyed homes were not capable of withstanding winds beyond 80 miles per hour. They also noted that there were no safe rooms in the most heavily damaged neighborhoods. The team counted 4 confirmed dead and 40 injured. The final number of dead would later be revised to 5, with 1 additional death attributed to a heart attack suffered during the storm. The immediate search and rescue was chaotic. The fire department was overwhelmed. The police department had only 12 officers on duty. The county sheriff's office sent 4 deputies. The Arkansas State Police arrived about 45 minutes after the storm, but they had to stop at the edge of town because the roads were blocked. They walked the last mile carrying search equipment. The rescue teams used chainsaws to cut through fallen trees. They used crowbars to pry open collapsed walls. They used flashlights because there was no power. They called out for survivors. They listened for voices, for cries, for tapping. They dug through debris with their hands. The first survivor was pulled from a collapsed house at 5:40. The last survivor was pulled from a destroyed mobile home at 9:20. The 5th victim was not found until the next morning. A child who had been in the living room of a house that was swept off its foundation. The body was found under a piece of roof sheeting in a field. The hospital in Wynne was damaged but still operational. Had backup generators. It had a triage tent set up in the parking lot. The staff treated the walking wounded first, then the more serious cases. The most critical patients were stabilized and then transferred to hospitals in Jonesboro and Memphis. The helipad at the hospital was damaged by debris. Helicopters had to land on the football field at the high school, which was also damaged. The field was covered with debris. The pilots had to clear it by hand using whatever tools were available. The first helicopter landed at 6:15. The last one left at 11:03. The federal response came through FEMA, which declared a major disaster on April 3, 2023. That declaration unlocked federal funding for temporary housing, individual assistance, and public infrastructure repair. But the process was slow. The disaster recovery centers opened on April 10th. They were located in a church and a community center. They were staffed by FEMA officials, but the wait times were long. The hotline was overwhelmed. Many survivors filed claims and then waited weeks for a response. Some were approved for temporary housing vouchers, but there were not enough hotel rooms in the area. Hotels in Wynne were either destroyed or full. Hotels in neighboring towns were full too. Some survivors were housed in travel trailers provided by FEMA. Others were placed in apartments in Jonesboro, but many had to stay with relatives or in tents. The mental health toll became apparent in the months after the storm. The town had no full-time mental health clinic. The nearest one was 40 miles away. The Cross-County Counseling Center ordered more staff, but they struggled to hire licensed therapists. The center treated more than 600 patients in the first 6 months after the tornado. The most common diagnosis was post-traumatic stress disorder. The second was depression. The third was anxiety. The center reported that children made up about 40% of the patients. They showed symptoms such as bedwetting, nightmares, and separation anxiety. Many could not tolerate the sound of wind or rain. The long-term recovery has been slow. As of early 2025, about half of the destroyed homes had been rebuilt. The other half remained empty. The new high school was under construction but not yet open. The elementary school was back in its building, but only because the repairs were partial. The gymnasium roof was fixed, but the walls still showed cracks. The middle school was operating in temporary classrooms. The town's economy had not fully recovered. The main employer was an agricultural processing plant. It was not damaged, but many of its workers lost their homes and had to move. The plant struggled to retain staff. The unemployment rate in Cross County remained above the state average. The disaster also highlighted a persistent issue: the lack of building codes in rural Arkansas. The state has no mandatory statewide code. Each county can adopt its own. Cross County had not adopted one. After the tornado, state legislators proposed a bill to create a voluntary building code program. It passed, but the program is weak. It offers incentives but no enforcement. The new homes being built in Wynne are not required to meet any wind resistance standard. Some builders are adding safe rooms voluntarily. Most are not. The cost is about $15,000 per room. That is too much for many homeowners. The question that remains is whether anything will change. The Wynne tornado is one of many. In 2023 alone, there were more than 1,200 tornadoes in the United States. The majority were in the South. The majority hit rural areas. The majority killed people in mobile homes. The majority struck communities with no safe rooms. The National Weather Service has called this a public health crisis. But the solution is expensive and politically difficult. Safe rooms cost money. Building codes require enforcement. Cell tower hardening requires investment. Every time a disaster strikes, there is a window of opportunity for change. And every time the window closes, in Wynne the window has not yet fully closed. The town is still rebuilding. The school district is planning a new safe room that can hold the entire student body. The fire department is applying for a grant to replace the outdated sirens. The county is talking about adopting a building code. None of this is certain, but the people of Wynne are not waiting for the next storm to decide. They have already decided. They are building slowly, block by block, home by home, a different future. And the only question that remains is whether the rest of the country will join them.